Welcome. My name is Diane Proctor. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and I chair the Town Government Committee, which sponsors these wonderful First Fridays, which sometimes aren't on, as you may have noticed, on the first Friday. In this case, it's the second Friday, but we continue to call it in honor of our wonderful Marge Daggett, who started this program years ago in Lexington and then brought this habit to Concord. And for that, we are eternally grateful. The focus is usually on concerns that focus on our town, needs of our town, ideals for which our town yearns, and to provide information to citizens. And this is such an example. When Envision Concord was accepted in July of 2018, which is now a full 3 years ago, hopes abounded for a vigorous discussion of our town's transportation future, emphasizing a desire to sustain the scenic, and this is right from the text, the scenic quality and character of, quote, our roadways. The plan nonetheless noted that Concord may benefit from improvements that enhance options for traveling through our town, whether on foot or on bicycle or car, or while pushing a stroller or managing a wheelchair, or through public transportation. As well, the committee's eyes never wavered from a commitment to lower carbon emissions. We are extremely fortunate this morning to have as our speaker and to kick off this conversation, Nick Pappas. Nick is a remarkable man. I've certainly seen him in many public settings before, but little did I know really what his fascinating background. He grew up in Boston and attended that rather remote place called Harvard, and got an economics degree as an undergraduate. He worked in the computer industry for 28 years at Digital Equipment Corporation. And I'm going to read what he did, because I can't do that just off the top of my head, where he started out managing large software product development projects. He later worked for Digital Software Services Organization as North American Operations Manager and Strategic Planning Manager. Among, therefore, his many talents is a capacity for broad organization and thinking. Nick left Digital in 1994. And you might think he left to start up his own computer program or his own computer company, but no. He went off and started Lizzie's Ice Cream in Waltham. Why? Because he has been motivated by his mission to bring people together. And ice cream in an urban setting offered many opportunities to do precisely that. He sold that business to his employees in 1916 when he then retired. Nick has been living in Concord now for many years, and he has served since 1970, and he has served on all sorts of commissions. In other words, when he came to Concord, that sense of being part of the community. He was in the Public Works Commission, the Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee, the Long Range Planning Committee, the Sustainable Advisory Committee, and now the Natural Resource Commission. It is a real privilege to have Nick, who focused for the Envision Concord study on transportation with us this morning. Please be sure to mute yourself. I think that maybe have been done automatically, but if it hasn't been. And as Nick presents his slides and talks, Carlin Reed will be monitoring the chat box. And we encourage you to put all of your questions in the chat box. Carlin will distill those questions at the end of Nick's presentation. After that, if there are still questions that you have, of course, we shall entertain them. So take it away, Nick.
Thank you, Diane. Thought the best way to organize this was to give sort of a slideshow, which I will talk over. And when we were working on the Long Range Planning Committee, it was clear when people were signing up for sections that they wanted to work on that there was no one who was going to stand up and do transportation. And that was, I think, a reflection of the fact that the town really has not had any sort of organizational focus on transportation. So I thought it would be an interesting topic, so I grabbed it and educated myself, and my gosh, is it a complicated topic. So if we'll do some screen sharing here, let me see if I can find it. There it is. Okay, so transportation, mobility, we tended to use the term mobility in the committee because we felt it was more comprehensive, that it's more focused on the on people's desire to get around, and getting around in Concord is really what this is all about. What's in the long range plan? We'll come back to this slide at the end, but quickly, establishing a central transportation planning function within town government. And we were careful not to indicate whether that is embodied in a person or exactly how you do it. We didn't want to get hung up on that. But the point is the town needed a focus. Some of the objectives: to reduce motor vehicle dependence and traffic volume, provide effective mobility options, both within Concord and from Concord to other places. And part of that is reflecting the fact that Concord has an aging population. My wife and I, we have medical appointments in Boston, and I really dislike having to drive into Boston and pay for parking to have the medical appointments. It would be wonderful if there was another way to do that. Creating safe, effective walking and bicycling connections. This talks mostly about between existing things, but it really was intended to cover bicycling and pedestrian and wheelchair accessibility and all of that, everything that isn't vehicles. Improve coordination with regional partners and develop an approach to parking that balances the principles of sustainability with the town's economic goals. Okay, moving on. Transportation, my big learning was transportation is a system, and it's a complicated system. There are several components or dimensions, however you like to think of these things. One of them is the ways we move about: cars, taxis, Uber, Lyft, transit, buses, commuter rail, bikes, walking. There are huge, all these different ways that we get around. And then the supporting infrastructure, the roads, the parking, the rail system, the traffic control. And traffic control is an interesting one. It's obviously traffic lights, but it's also crosswalks, it's the line markings on the streets, it's attempts to do traffic calming to slow people down. It's the laws that attempt to govern the behavior of vehicles on the street. It's the enforcement of those laws. Traffic control is a big one. And then there are bikeways, sidewalks, all of that, the supporting infrastructure. And then next, and this is where the obstacles are, the political and economic environment. And I would also add to this now sort of the physical layout of Concord. Sprawl. The government at all levels supports private home ownership through tax subsidies and other things. There are subsidized modes of transportation. Automobile use is heavily subsidized, and government investment in roads, government investment or subsidies for everything from petrochemical companies producing fuels to the car manufacturers themselves. And unfortunately, there's limited control by local government. We can't do much locally to tax, to build roads where we want. If you wanted to build an overpass over Route 2, you can't. It's a state highway, and it would be expensive. The system is complex. One of the implications of this is if you change one thing, you affect something else. More parking, guarantee you'll get more traffic. How do I know that? Why did you build the parking? To draw more cars, obviously. You improve rail service, you'll increase the demand for parking. If you improve traffic flow, you'll attract more drivers. So you get rid of congestion, but more drivers come. That's the old one about, you build more lanes in the road, you just, the capacity disappears. More people buy houses farther away. And then the next one, stopping cut-through drivers here, they go someplace else. They go to a different neighborhood or a different town. So how do you change a complex system? How do you approach this problem? Carefully, very carefully, for the reasons I just mentioned. You do one thing here, it affects something over there. We have to do it as a community, not as individual groups pushing hard for their solution. We have to do it as a region, talking with the other towns. And this is not very well supported because the state does not really do much to support regional activity. A change will not be easy. The economic system, the political system, the social environment is against change. We're all brought up, people our age were brought up in a system where car ownership and the freedom of car ownership is something embedded in us. This is an interesting one because when I sold my business, I had a company car. So the question was, should we get another car and continue to have a second car? And we said, let's not do that. Let's see what we can do with one car. And my great learning from that was, it was amazing how many spur of the moment unnecessary trips I did. To go to the nursery to get plant materials, to go to the hardware store, partly to just hang around and see stuff, you know, shopping trips that could be avoided. It was just shocking. So, you know, that's part of the resistance to change. We enjoy that. We have to admit it. And in Concord, roads flow through two hubs, the center and West Concord. You can really see this in the old rush hours before the pandemic. Concord Center, you had the people coming in on Lowell Road and heading east, and then you had the people coming from West Concord, who all would converge in Concord Center. And if you tried, I remember our people in the long-range planning committee who lived in West Concord, sometimes it would take them over 30 minutes, half an hour to get from their homes to Keyes Road. So making change in this system, it's going to require determination and persistence. Quick wins are going to be small at the start, and it's going to take a significant investment as well. It's going to cost money. So establishing, this was the first thing on the long-range plan list, was establish a central transportation planning function within town government. And we were very careful not to say hire someone to do it, or, you know, make any structural recommendation of how that should be embedded in town government. That wasn't our purview. It's really up to the select board and town management to decide what is going to be most effective. Why do we need to do that? We need to provide focus. The fact that I, knowing nothing of transportation, had to step up in the long-range planning committee and be the person to work on it was a great indication that there's no place to go if you want to talk about this. No place to go where you can hope to make change or have someone who is involved in change. Another reason, to collect relevant data in one place for examination and analysis. The data we have is scattered around. There's some data the state has collected on traffic levels in various places. Not many, but a few in Concord. I discovered that the Public Works Department actually these days, before they do any significant road work or project, they go out and they measure the traffic. You know, we have data. We know where the cars are if you dig into it. So, you know, we need to pull all that together. There are also there's a lot of available information from the state as well. And, and still on that previous one, you know, there's the information on traffic stops that the police department has. There's a lot of information around. Oh, the bus routes and the school system. When are the buses out? How many are they? Where do they go? Also, we need a central function to assure that plans are broadly agreed. And I think in the long-range planning, this was something we were very careful to do, to involve the citizenry, to involve the departments, to involve, you know, everyone we could find to help us figure out where we're going. It's a complex system, and no one person or one function can analyze and fix a complex system. It has to involve many. And we need a focused function to coordinate the work. This is going to involve many departments. It's going to involve people outside of town government. It's going to involve, for instance, the Chamber of Commerce has a role to play here. But, you know, there are other groups too that aren't part of town government. And we need to measure the progress. You know, we need a way, for a couple of reasons. One is to sustain us so that we can see that we're getting someplace, but also to try to measure the impact. And we have to establish an investment plan. We have to figure out how we're going to spend, how we're going to get the money to do what we need to do. I was thinking the other night about this one, and it's interesting. I don't know if we can take advantage of this, but when they built the Rose Fitzgerald Greenway in Boston, one of the things they've been able to take advantage of, they set up some sort of organization that was defined by the state government. And more or less all of the businesses and organizations along that way, the Rose Fitzgerald Greenway, are part of that. And they spend money on it. They invest money in it. And I was thinking, boy, in Concord, we certainly, we have a lot of small businesses. They don't have much money to spend on that. We also have a lot of real estate businesses that make a lot of money on Concord transactions. I would hope that they might be willing to come to the table, but we need an investment plan. So back to the first slide, what is in the long range plan? It is all of this stuff. There's a lot of it. And that's it. It's big, it's complicated. I'm going to stop screen sharing if I can again figure out how to do that. Oh, what happens if I do that? Oh, I see. I'm in my document. Everyone was able to see that, I hope.
It was fantastic. We could see it beautifully.
Fumbling around, trying to figure out.
Up at the stop, at the very top of your screen, there should be a stop screen sharing note.
No, I'm not. Oh, wait a
Way,
minute.
way up on your screen.
Oh, I see. I think I know what's wrong. I need to go to Zoom. Stop share.
There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Well done. Thank you, Nick, so much. Nick, that was so interesting. I think we have quite a few questions in the chat box, and so I'll turn to Carlin to try to present some of those or summarize some of those. Carlin?
Okay, I'm looking at the chat and I don't see a whole lot going on at the moment, so please put it in there. Maybe I'm just not seeing it, but I do have one that I was actually typing it out hurriedly because I thought, oh, this is cool. Nick, you talked about traffic studies. How do you determine if a traffic study, actually the result, is fair, accurate, and representative? And I'm putting it in the context of several planning board meetings and zoning board of appeal meetings where we've had studies presented, but there have been questions about, oh, this was done during COVID, so it's not an accurate representation. Or, oh, this study was hired by a company that was hired by the developer, so of course they have a bias. How do you determine if a traffic study is fair? How's that for a starter?
Well, by asking those questions. Is it fair? Who did it? What was their bias? Should you look at it askance? I think the ones the state has done hopefully should be pretty good. I mean, you have to put a filter on those too, because when did they do it? Was it vacation season? Everyone leaves Concord in parts of the summer. Is it really representative, or was it done in the fall, or when was it done? So I think any of them, you need to examine them in detail to figure out what biases may have been brought to them, either through circumstance or through funding agent.
Nick, I put a couple questions in and I realized that they somehow went someplace else. So I'm going to use them for a minute, Carlin, if that's okay. And the first one.
That's okay. I've had 4 more pop up. So go ahead, Diane.
Fantastic. While you distill those, let me ask a couple. Okay. Nick, if you were the czar of transportation, what properly agreed upon goals would you proffer? Understanding that there would be discussion that would follow.
Long term, I want to think long term, and that can be difficult. But long term, we need to cut down on single vehicle occupancy. We need to reduce the number of cars. And that's difficult rather, because so many things in the environment subsidize car ownership and sprawl. And sprawl is the particular problem that Concord has. We're just too spread out. We have big housing lots, so not much density. And if you try to bring people, I think there are ways of dealing with that. For instance, it's better to drive to a lot where you can meet a vehicle that will take you and other people someplace than to drive everywhere yourself. Okay, so there are some possibilities for change, but I'd say that's a start.
If we were to close off the roads into Concord Center and into West Concord and make it a walking village, 2 walking villages with some sort of creative way to help people for whom mobility is a challenge. Would you see that as even a remote probability, a kind of a European style town? And what would be the implication?
Well, there are a lot of, the fact that state highways go through both of those places make it difficult. But I have seen things done. There's something, where was this? I'm going blank on what country it was in, but what they did basically is they eliminated curbs. They put the pedestrians at the same level as the traffic, and it had an amazing impact on slowing down the cars. What we do with curbs is we declare that when you step off the curb, you are a potential victim of a car. And, you know, it's the car zone, you know, you don't belong there. And so I think there are imaginative things that you could experiment with to try to slow the traffic down.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Carlin?
All right, sounds good. I've got a couple here. From Nancy Confrey, what's the status of developing a transportation function in town? What form is it taking? You had this vision of, we're not going to define it, but what is happening now?
Well, I think that's better for the select board to address. So I will pass on that one. We
Okay,
have select board members here.
okay. Diane, you decide whether you want to boot that to later, or shall we proceed to the next one? Next one?
Go on to the next one, please.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
All right. Okay, Stefan has asked, was there a discussion about commuter parking at Crosby's conflicting with transit-oriented development at the same site? And I think that relates to the proposal for the Thoreau Depot development area. So during Envision Concord, and Stefan, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, during the Envision Concord, did they talk about Crosby's commuter parking lot?
It was mentioned. I mean, it's available now for buses, as I understand it, right? If you're taking a bus into Concord, that's where one of the places they stop and pick you up, in addition to paparazzi in that area. And by implication, parking for commuters is available there, and it's clearly marked in Crosby's parking lot.
Okay. Okay, Claire has asked, in terms of the transportation hubs, what other modes of transportation come to the 2 railroad stations? What do you think we need?
I'm not sure I understood that. What do I think we need?
Okay, perhaps I should ask Claire to help me with the clarification of that, if she can give me some help with that. I don't know about that. Claire, you had asked about in terms of the transportation hubs.
Right. Well, the railroad stations for zoning purposes and others are considered, you know, major hubs. But in Concord, yeah, you get there by road and parking. But what do we need there that would make it more viable to go into Boston, for example, or the other way? What do we need to make that a real hub?
I think one thing you need is a way for people to get from their house to the station without driving a car.
Yeah.
Okay. The long term, we have to reduce the number of cars. There's no, you know, going electric is nice, but it's not the solution. We need to cut down the number of cars.
Okay, here's one that bridges that, and this is a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Diane, did you want to go ahead?
Go ahead. And then I'm next. Go ahead.
All right, I'll do this one, then I'll bounce it back to you. This is a bridge from Ellen Quackenbush. What is the role of ride-sharing apps to carpool on the fly for errands or entertainment? And I'll also add to get to the railway hubs.
This may be controversial, but I think they make things worse. Where they can help is if you have multiple passengers. If the car share service is picking up multiple passengers and acting like a sort of a small bus or something, that could be good. But if you calculate how much time they spend going from one place to another without anyone in the vehicle, I don't think that they help at all. You know, they may help an individual, but they don't help the global problem of fewer vehicles on the road.
It is complicated, isn't it, Nick? I mean, one of the things that would make the whole train hubs more effective would be a difference in the schedule. As the trains are presently scheduled, they to some degree serve the commuting population, but not really. For instance, if you decided you wanted to go in for a lecture, if you decided you wanted to go in and take a couple of courses, and then you start examining the train schedule and you find that really it's virtually impossible. It doesn't blend itself with that kind of diverse set of choices, or as you and your wife suggest, to go in and have a medical checkup.
I haven't followed this, but there was some talk recently, and I saw it in the Globe, about the MBTA on commuter rail having a more level service so that it didn't just disappear in the middle of the day the way it does now. I mean, I agree. It's just, you know, if you happen to be traveling at rush hour and you want to use the train, it ain't bad, but you know, as long as you get there, well, there's still parking. But you know, if you want to go during the middle of the day, forget it, or the weekend.
And I know that service is available. For instance, if you lived in Needham, that train service runs more frequently, more regularly, and the citizens therefore count on it. They rely on it. They use it to go everywhere from Fenway Park to MGH. I mean, you know, it becomes a very helpful. Do towns have influence on, I mean, in your research, do towns have influence on the MBTA system?
I didn't do anything specific on researching the MBTA. I believe that they are currently more receptive to trying to level out the service, daytime levels of service. I don't know any details about that.
Okay, can I bounce back to the chat? All right.
Then Carlin to Philip Posner, who has his hand raised. So go ahead.
All right. There's a note from Terry Ackerman saying that she can actually respond to the question we had about the current transportation efforts. Terry, if you're available to give us a response, I think now is a good time. If you can.
Thank you, Carlin. I can respond. I can respond to several of the questions. First of all, the select board has reconstituted the Transportation Advisory Committee, and we're looking for 7 citizens to serve on this committee. We do have some applicants already. I'm very excited. We're looking for diversity. We want walkers, runners, parents of children going to school, bicyclists, disabled people, people who come to Boston or use the medical centers. We want people who are interested in regional transportation. We want a really diverse committee to get going on this and start working on, like Nick put it, creating this central function in town, because he's right, we don't have anyone in charge of transportation. So please go on the town website and apply to be on this exciting transportation committee. I know Phil Posner is on it, representing the bicycle community, and that'll be really great. Phil has a wealth of knowledge on that. Just to briefly answer a couple other questions. Claire had a question about how to get to the rails, and other towns have already excuse me, invented this. We don't have to reinvent this. It's called Crosstown Connect. It was invented in Acton, and we have finally joined. The town of Concord has joined. We don't have a program yet. Basically, a shuttle will come around by appointment and pick up people and take them to the commuter rails. And I think also to the local medical areas. But again, we need a committee, we need staff, we need people to get this organized, because we actually have a program where a member, we just haven't done it yet. So we're very eager to do that. And finally, about the MBTA, Diane, I was the select board liaison for the MBTA from Concord. There are, I don't know, 150 towns or something involved. And there's an MBTA advisory committee. And so we have a teensy-weensy little amount of influence. Don't have any influence. The only time I saw us get anything really done was when the T said they were going to cut out the commuter rail completely
Oh, I remember.
during the pandemic. Well, then all the 150 suburban towns flipped out and we had some leverage at that point. So it's tough going with the MBTA.
Thank you, Terry. That's a big help. Terry, who's going to chair the TAC? Transportation Advisory Committee?
I have no idea. It will be a citizen. It will be one of the people on the committee. First, we need to seat all the people on the committee. Then that committee will choose its chair, just like all the other committees.
Just as normal. Thank you very much. I had a note from someone saying that they were the chair, and so I wanted to make sure that I understood.
Diane, thank you, Terry. Before we go to people asking questions, there's one other chat that I'd like to touch on, and that's about electric cars. A couple of the questions say, well, are electric cars the solution? Should we be electrifying as much as possible? What about Tesla? Nick, is it possible for you to address any of those areas?
Yes. Going electric doesn't cut down on traffic. It doesn't make it any easier to go from one part of town to the other during rush hour. Electric is good in terms of energy, managing our energy future and cutting down on fossil fuels if the energy generation sources are not fossil fuels. But ultimately, I think the solution, electric is not the solution to the problems we have with transportation. It is a mode. And in the short run, it's necessary, absolutely necessary. I went to a hybrid vehicle myself recently that even though it weighs 5,000 pounds, it gets just about 40 miles to the gallon. It's incredible. So it works for me, but I don't think in the long run, no.
Thank you.
Okay, Diane, do you want me to continue with chat or do you want to take questions?
I want to take Phil's question, and then could you go back to the chat, please, Carmen?
Absolutely, go ahead. Hey, Phil.
Morning, everybody. Sorry, I was distracted there for the beginning of the meeting, but it's nice to see everybody on the Zoom and interested in the topic. I wanted to also say thanks to Terry for alerting us that Crosstown Connect is now going to be part of our transportation mix. I think that's terrific. My particular point is that one of the challenges I think we have in town is we have a less than the best approach to design in the town. And we tend to, I think, look to older models to try to solve contemporary problems. So, to put that in context, I think it's great that Crosstown Connect is going to be a part of our transportation mix. I'm hoping that somebody who is participating in that is thinking one of our train stations is in West Concord Village, and if we have the largest Crosstown Connect vehicles regularly in that spot, it will actually take up the entire Commonwealth Avenue. Those are very large vehicles. So maybe as part of what we do, we get smaller vehicles. Okay, it's not rocket science, but it's that kind of attention to detail and thinking that isn't always present. People tend to want to just use the model that has worked in one place and suggest that it works every place. With transportation, one thing that I've learned is that flexible thinking is a really important element in terms of trying to solve problems. Just applying the same approach over and over doesn't really work because our landscape is substantially set. And in order to address what we already have, we need to come up with new models. The last thing I wanted to say is part of what I've been doing the last couple of years is encouraging the kids to ride their bikes to school using, first it was just a citizens-based model, and now the schools have adopted the Safe Routes to School program, which is basically a state-sponsored program, and it's actually part of a nationally based and financed program. The whole point of the Safe Routes to School program is to encourage kids to ride their bikes and walk instead of being driven to school in individual vehicles. It is been extraordinarily successful over the last couple of years. 90 kids showed up on their bikes yesterday at the Willard School. 90 kids. It was awesome. It helped that it was a really beautiful day. But part of the learning there is that the way that the 90 kids showed up was that they were encouraged to do so. They had support from the police department. They had support from the schools. So this is a kind of team effort approach that I think we need to utilize in trying to lift this problem. We need to not just have a transportation committee, not just have this forum. We need to have all of our hands on deck working together as a team.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Carl?
ready for another one?
Yeah.
Okay. We've heard about electric vehicles. What about buses? Adding buses to Concord? That's one of the comments here. Were there some plans, or are there some plans? And this comes from Ned Perry about adding bus connections for Concord.
And say something about the characteristics of buses and bus routes. What tends to be a bit problematic is fixed routes with fixed stops, which has been described as a service that takes you from where you are not to not quite where you want to go. I think if you're going to do buses, I think buses are going to be a very important part of the solution, but we have to figure out how to reinvent the bus concept so that it serves people better than the traditional approach.
Okay. Okay, a question from Julie asked a question about, we're used to focusing on transporting people. What about being able to transport things? Being able to take this stuff with you on the trains that we have? Did the Environment Vision Concord talk about transporting things, not just people?
No, we didn't get into that level of detail, but that's obviously a very important part. One of the reasons I have a car and can't do anything else is I've got a bunch of stuff I have to take someplace. I have to make 4 stops. I have to pick other things up. It's my car. My car's a Highlander. It'll hold a lot of stuff, so I use that.
Okay. A question that came up during the context of a middle school building committee meeting just recently. The Bruce Freeman Trail, which we've been hearing lots about, runs next to the middle school site. There's a question that's being discussed now about whether or not a pathway should be enhanced or enlarged to connect the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail to the middle school, the proposed middle school site. Part of the problem is the steep grade, but it also provides the kind of access that we heard Phil Posner talk about earlier about kids being able to get to school. Now, Nick, when you did your Envision Concord studies, did you think about the transportation by bicycle of kids and others to schools like that?
No, we didn't deal with that level of detail. No, I think it is an important part of the solution. So I think we should look at that situation and the barrier that's there and figure out how we can deal with it. That's the attitude we should bring to the problem.
Okay. All right. And there was another question about, did the Envision Concord folks look to what's going on in Acton and Bedford regarding how they're handling bicycling changes? I think to improve the bicycling adoption.
We did not in detail or even slightly. But I will say that since my participation in the Envision Concord process, that I had a friend who was in hospice and I was his caregiver, and he lives in Jamaica Plain. So I did a lot of driving for almost a year between Concord and Jamaica Plain. And I was very impressed with how far ahead some communities are, further ahead than Concord, in the way they design their streets and the way they make them more acceptable for people with other modes of transportation, bicycles, walking, everything. So I think we have some challenges there. We may need to spend more money to do them, but we have to look at everything there, including our attitude to what comes first.
Could you give us an example, Nick?
Yes, One of them is the Massachusetts Turnpike extension where it goes through Brighton, Alston. There's a street that parallels it. I forget the name of it at the moment, but it's right up tight against the highway. And it's obviously a street that can be used for cut through. And instead of putting bumps there to slow the cars down, which is a problem for plows, they just put cobblestones, which is enough to slow down a car, but not enough to inconvenience a plow. Okay, so I thought that was good. And there were, I don't remember the details, but there were markings I saw in the city of Newton that were, the way they've marked it for bicycles was very different than anything I've seen around here. So I think there's a lot we can learn from the other communities. And that's one of the first things we should do because they've already done it. There aren't any barriers to doing it except maybe some budgeting.
Okay. Diane, I have a new topic. It concerns the pedestrian bridge over the Assabet River from Baker Ave to the T station. There, as Stefan has noted in the chat, that this is in the works. Did the Envision Concord look at the benefits of having that type of a pedestrian bridge, Nick? And if
No,
not,
it did not, but I'm hopeful that has the potential to draw more commuters to the train service, I think. So maybe it will do that. I mean, it's something I would hope we could measure it. It gets complicated because we've had the pandemic and ridership is down, so everything is skewed, but there are probably ways we can figure that out.
When I was in graduate school, I studied with Jay Forrester, Nick, who was a
Yes.
Concordian, and he talked about the attractive multiplier effect. So, you know, build the bridge and they will come. I mean, you know, that
If you
it's
put it in the right place.
that you put in the right place. So go ahead, Carlin, I'm sorry.
oh, no, that's fine. The attractive multiplier, Diane, I think I know what that is. And I think, Nick, could you expand on that concept a little bit more? Because it's the first time I've seen it actually expressed in an equation form.
Well, and when Nick was talking about the fact that when you build a highway, suddenly you're going to have more cars on it. One of the examples that Forrester loved to use was that when they were building the Southeast Expressway, well before, just on the planning boards, well before it was built, it was already overcrowded because all sorts of towns south of Boston said, oh, look, there's going to be now this great access to Boston. And so they began to advertise, and before you know it, the sprawl that Nick emphasized in the beginning begins to happen. So it becomes an attraction and it multiplies the effect. And so it was already the Southeast Expressway parking lot before it was even completed. And so the idea is that something is attractive and therefore it's going to, in fact, take into account the fact that it will attract more than you think. So Nick's wonderful example of, and whoever asked this question, of the bicycles that will now be coming through to be able perhaps to use not just our businesses, but the train. Does that help, Carlin? Does that make sense?
It does to me. Nick, did you have any follow-up? Because it sounds like we build roads and pathways to address current congestion.
Historical congestion.
Historical congestion. What you're saying is history just increases itself. And so we create more congestion.
Yeah, it's a well-known thing in development of roadways that if you build more capacity, it will fill very quickly and you're not going to get the benefit that you fantasized. It just doesn't happen. And that's true of any system. If you think about it, it's like water seeking its own level. Traffic is going to find the best way and people will relocate. And people will develop properties out to take advantage of the road.
Great. We've got some good suggestions from Hugh in the chat box about safe biking and walking routes to and from school. So I would encourage folks to take a look at that when you have a moment. Let's see, looking for new topics. Okay, I've got one question about buses being electric. Nick, do you happen to know what the status is of electrifying the town's fleet?
I know the town got at least one electric bus for school bus, but that's about all I know.
I think we now have two. we were on part of a, Terry helped me on this one, or Linda, or I don't know if Susan Bates is here yet, but Linda, I think at first, thank you, I thought so, Terry. First, we did it on an experimental basis, and then we bought one.
Okay, Diane, I'm running low on chat questions right now. If there's something else you want to cover, I'll take another scan through what I have about this. This is really good stuff, though. All right.
Can you summarize some of the things that Hugh is suggesting? If you have a moment.
Some of the things that, some of the suggestions. Oh, sure.
You have.
Look at that. It's a good long suggestion.
And while you're doing that, Carlin, let me ask you another question, Nick. The Council on Aging van that I see moving around town is obviously invaluable for people who don't drive, or for people who need to do local shopping, but it's a difficult thing for them to manage that transportation mode. I know people in Newbury Court, for instance, who don't have cars. I mean, they really depend on vans to take them from place to place. Would electric vans that stop at particular centers like Newbury Court, centers like what is going to be the Junction Village area, are those, where would you imagine those vans being most appropriately directed in our town? I mean, what are the kind of hot spots to which something like that should go?
That's a good question. I don't know one of the issues. Let me bring up a side issue. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to think about that one, and I don't know if I have any data to support thinking about it. One of the issues I heard when we were looking at that is that there are a lot of privately owned vans that transport individuals, such as the ones owned by the Council on Aging. There are ones that are used by Emerson Hospital, or they serve Emerson Hospital. I don't know who owns them and runs them. There's Crosstown Connect. One of the issues with some of the privately owned and managed ones is it's for their people only. And I think the school buses are like that. They're used intensively, but they're not used on weekends much. So could that help? I think there are barriers we have to break down. There are walls we have to break down to better utilize existing resources that we already have, that are partitioned off, that I can't use them. Right? That's
gorgeous. That's like what you and Phil have been saying. Be imaginative, be creative, think around and about. Carlin.
Diane, I have a follow-up to this, the question about senior medical transportation, and then I want to get back to summarizing what Hugh had done. But on senior medical transportation, I've got a note here from Stefan that he can do a quick update on what he's seen. And I don't know, Nick, if you had talked about senior medical transportation in particular in your Envision Concord days, but if we could also ask Stefan to help us.
One of the main bullets on the first slide that had much content on it was specifically about transporting people for medical appointments. I forget the exact wording on it, but it was, the idea, the vision is to be able to get people from Concord to where, whether it's Leahy and Burlington, or whether it's downtown Boston to the medical area, wherever, where the medical services are. We have Concord, we have an aging population. We know that. It was all documented in the plan. And, there's no reason people should have to drive down there on their own.
Great. Can we get Stefan to do a quick follow-up if he's available? Stefan, are you around?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I and my wife are both volunteers for the Council on Aging, driving seniors to medical appointments. And as you say, frequently it's Burlington or Boston, where the Council on Aging van does not go. The Council on Aging van basically doesn't leave the boundaries of Concord unless it's to shop in Maynard or Acton. So the Council on Aging, and I think FISH, Friends in Service Helping, also provide services like that. It is still car-based because typically the appointment is either at a strange time, like be at Mass General at 7 a.m. Or something like that. If you had a noon appointment, you could take the commuter rail in. Sometimes the hospitals won't let you go unless you have a private car on release. They'll take you in a wheelchair to the to the sidewalk, and then they want to see you get in a car and not try to navigate public transit on your own. So it's like everything else in transportation, it's complicated.
That's such helpful information.
Okay, sounds good. Now let's go back to what Hugh has suggested, some suggestions he has, and for the benefit of those who can't see the chat meeting on this video, I'm just going to read them because they're pretty short and sweet. Safe bike walking routes into and out of each of the Concord schools. These are some of his suggestions. A shuttle bus from Concord centers to West Concord Center that residents and commuters could use. Commuters could go to the train stations. The sidewalk bridge over Route 62 into West Concord. It's not safe for walkers or cyclists. Also, upgrade the reformatory branch to make it walking and cycling safe with speed limits, of course. I know that's generated some questions about whether the reformatory branch trail should be paved. Seniors at CCHS, I know, seniors at CCHS nearly all drive to and from the school every day for many reasons, but primarily because there's no late afternoon school bus around 5 to 5:30 p.m. And Hugh's last suggestion is carpooling incentives for high school seniors. That may be a school department issue. And Hugh, thank you very much for those suggestions.
Yeah, Colleen, just one other, if I can add, just one final
Yeah.
point to the end. So thanks very much for this forum, by the way, and appreciate it. A small group of us have been working on trying to fund or get a grant for essentially a bike shelter or a bike shed at the high schools, because, you know, encouraging cycling is one thing, but on those rainy days, it's really not pleasant to get to a bike which is soaking wet and vice versa. So, and safe. So that was something else which we've applied for a grant for, but we failed in our attempt, but we hopefully tried again. But that'll be another thing. I think, as Nick said at the start, it's a very complex issue, transportation is, but you know, how do you eat an elephant? And it's really one bite at a time. So there are many ways to approach this transportation problem for all generations, you know, for the young, for the commuters, for the, you know, for the aging, you know, so, and people who are coming into Concord and people who live here. So there are many different aspects. So I agree, complex, but there are many different approaches that can be taken. Just to
one thing I'd make on that is that you run the risk of sub-optimization, which is that, you know, you make it better for one thing, but you don't make it globally better. And that's one of the reasons we need to coordinate these things better. That's why we need a focus in town government, so that there's knowledge of these things that are happening. You know, it was a big surprise to me how many private shuttles operate through the town. I was surprised. I didn't realize the extent that supports Emerson Hospital, for instance. And that's sub-optimization. I'm solving my problem, but I've got empty capacity going back someplace else. That's not good. So I think we need to draw all of that in. We need to have this central function, which hopefully fairly quickly could just get up the list. How big is the universe here that we're talking about? Who's doing what?
All right, Hugh, I just want to let you know, you've already had a call from several folks that you should apply for the Transportation Advisory Committee if you haven't already submitted your volunteer card. So I personally would join the chorus, send it in.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Ellen Quackenbush has her hand raised.
Yeah, just two comments. One, I think one of the things that is valued highly by Concord is our natural resources and spectacular, I don't know, conservation area. So I think, you know, when we think about transportation, we should also think about preserving and protecting some of the endangered areas, which is why, in my humble opinion, paving or changing reformatory branch is something that needs a broad discussion. Second, it's Nick, when you were talking about ride sharing, one thing I would love to see is someplace I can pop in, you know, I want to go to these places and have other people, you know, say, sure, I'll carpool with you. Because what happens, the comment about, what is it? You said, you know, you don't get right where you want to go. But sometimes if you discuss people, you can say, oh yeah, I could wait 10 minutes. I could, you know, we could talk on the way and we could get together. So it's like that idea of incenting seniors to carpool, but how about incenting us to carpool? I think that would, in some way, if we encourage that and celebrated that, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, I don't think it would be expensive to set
No.
up some sort of carpooling software or service or some way to do it.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I can't remember where I read it, but it was, it's like totally doable.
I think, I don't often say this, but something designed for our community would be important. There are probably commercial services available that might or might not serve our needs, but
Okay, Diane, what do you want next?
Pamela has her hand up. Pamela Dritt. Hi, good morning, Pam.
Thank you. Good morning. This is so exciting. I think one of the problems is getting from now to the future and envisioning a way that we can do it economically.
Ah.
Because if we could easily have a whole little fleet of electric town-owned autonomous vehicles that essentially took every citizen wherever they wanted to go, which would eliminate, and whenever they wanted to do it, which would eliminate the need for a vast number of cars. But getting from now, when we can't have it, to then, we could, when we have autonomous electric vehicles, we won't need to worry about public transportation systems because everywhere in the country can have that. They use the infrastructure we already have, the roads, and they use the infrastructure we need to build, which is electric power generating distribution systems for powering electric vehicles in order to fight climate change. So it's a win-win for the whole world. One thing I think that we need to do, that we could, as a sort of a transition thing, is have a town-sponsored set of small, like the COA vans, only electric, only available to more than just seniors, perhaps on a subscription service basis or on a per trip payment basis that people could use, even if you weren't a senior. That would be something that could be increased gradually in perhaps a cost-effective way. We don't want to add more diesel anythings. It's an obsolete technology, and it's terribly bad for our health. Diesel school buses are just, they're awful for children. And so as a town, I think we need to consider every time we make an infrastructure investment, is it in the right direction?
Thank you, Pamela. That reminder is always an important one.
just one thing. I think one goal we have to keep in mind in doing that is we need to increase the number of occupants per vehicle. If we continue to be each person jumping in the car and going wherever they want on a whim, we aren't going to get anywhere. We have to cut down on the needless trips that we all take on a moment's notice, which I know I discovered I'm very guilty of. And we have to make sure that there are more than one person in the car as much as possible, and not just to ride along, but who also has a need for transportation. So
I think that's an information problem, don't you? Because
it could well be.
if we had some way of knowing who was going at any particular moment.
Yeah, I think that's what Nick is talking about, Pamela, with a kind of an app or something that our town could use to create a community sensibility of being able to collaborate, as we travel around together. Carlin, we have 3 hands raised. We have Phil, and then Hugh, and then David. Let's start with Phil again. Phil?
Thanks, Diane. In listening to the comments, I don't know if folks remember the concept of paradigm shifts, but that was a big thing at one point in time. And I think one of the ways that we're going to look at this particular problem is to engage in some paradigm shifting. So right now we're actually engaged in that process, right? We're on a Zoom call. So instead of all of us traveling down to the senior center or to the townhouse in individual cars or whatever, we are now together discussing these ideas without having, actually used our transportation network to go. So to me, this is an example of a paradigm shift. Part of the next steps with regard to this paradigm shift idea as it applies to transportation is thinking through the kinds of concepts that Nick has been talking about. Do we need to have individual vehicles? When is that important? Can we substitute some other idea for accomplishing the tasks that you need to do? So, for example, do you need to go to the supermarket? Well, for some folks, that's actually not possible, right? There are folks with disabilities who can't actually get to the supermarket very easily. So there are alternatives. The big thing, I think, as we proceed is we need to develop a system so that the information that we are developing, the knowledge body, is available and accessible to people so that they are able to at least look at the same song sheet. One of our big problems is today, we are not all looking at the same information. We are looking at bits and pieces of information that have been developed, some of them 50 years ago, some of them yesterday. And we're drawing conclusions based on a somewhat disparate data set. So at the very start, I think we need to develop a means, either through the Transportation Committee or somebody else, for everybody to have access, and then we can proceed at least talking the same language.
Thank you so much.
Strongly agree with that last point. Getting the data, turning the data into information is what we need to do. We need to collect it and then figure out what it really means and where the value is in it.
Yeah,
Because
so-
it's clear that every move or change we make has consequences. I mean, it took a computer scientist to teach us that. Aha, an algorithm. Yeah, that's right, Nick? That's the right way to say that. Yeah, Hugh.
Yes. 1 second. Just having this. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, you can. Thank you.
So yes. So someone mentioned, obviously increasing the number of cars or number of riders per car is definitely valid and one way to look at it. Another way to look at it, especially in Concord situation, is to consider the number of cars per family in Concord, per household. Now, 2 years ago, there were very few people working from home full time. 2 years now, after the pandemic, that number has soared. That number has increased. Now, I'm speaking from my own anecdotal situation. We are in the situation where we have new drivers coming online, i.e. our kids. So, yeah. So we have a choice whether to buy a second car, a third car, and I'm at that decision now. And if the transportation hub or mechanism, could be improved slightly or considered, we have opportunities to reduce the number of cars in Concord. So looking at the riders per car is one way, but looking at the number of cars in Concord, i.e. the number of cars per household, is another way to look at things. So again, incentivize. I don't think anyone would want any kind of penalization of cars per household, but the way you want to do them is attract people to not have to purchase a third car, a fourth car. So that's one thing to consider. I agree with the autonomous point of view, but my fear about autonomous driving is there's just going to be so many autonomous cars on the road that's not going to be.
It's worse.
It's a viewpoint. So those two major points is what I wanted to add. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that, the schools, no one has really looked at this problem, I think, from a systems point of view about the students and what their true transportation needs are and how we can deal with that better.
Yeah.
We have an old model of the school bus picks a young person up, takes them to school and takes them home. That totally falls apart at the high school level, and because of the extracurricular activities. And that needs to be seriously studied. It's totally dysfunctional from my point of view for so many students to need to drive cars.
Sorry to interrupt, but I found it recently that high school seniors, it's almost unfashionable to take the school bus.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's it's quite a shock to me. So
I mean,
sorry to interrupt.
there's real peer pressure on the older kids, not to be on a bus. We've got three people. We've David Allen and then Claire and then Eleanor. David, you want to, your turn? Thank you. And good morning.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. I'm up in Maine. I hope I've got a connection here.
We can hear you.
Moving on from the chat, finally decided to actually say something about it. Global optimization beyond sub-optimization does presume an objective function. And since we're talking about a whole community, it means figuring out what the whole community wants. And of course, there are going to be very different preferences. I want to suggest, and you notice I say this, first of all, just to underline with such great appreciation for Nick's presentation. So much what we need. As he points out, this is a system issue. And he even noticed, I think, perhaps the greatest challenge is not figuring out steps we might take, potential solutions, but figuring out what, as a community, we'll agree to. I grew up in a place where on your 16th birthday, you got your driver's license because your car was your identity. Nick has already pointed out this is how we have been socialized. There will be preferences out there that say, pure cars, what are you talking about? We can have all the solutions in the world. We will only reach workable possibilities if we focus on what's probably the hardest part, which is resolving very different preferences for how we go forward.
Yeah, Nick, thank you, Dave.
One of the interesting contradictions in this is that the students who, I will say they need the cars, given the way the system works right now, given the need for the cars is so counter to their personal lives in the future. You know, it's their world. You know, we're not going to be here much longer. They're going to be here for decades. And look what they're doing, because we haven't supported them in coming to a better solution than everybody owning a car.
Oh, I've come to the habit of not speaking of the elderly, but I think of the gracefully aging, and even and of course we are gracefully aging. But as we age, you know, these issues become intergenerational, don't they, Nick? You know, so that we have many. Perhaps if the older generation can consider and be imaginative for and with the younger generation, we might be able to solve these problems more imaginatively. Claire is next, and then Ellie, and then I think Dory has a question.
Okay, I'm a champion for the MBTA, partly having lived in Arlington where it was so available to us. I really got to depend on it, but the schedule for the commuter rail is much better than it was as of, I think, midsummer. So really check that out as a possibility. And a lot of people don't know that the commuter rail stops at Porter Square, which connects with the Red Line, which connects with downtown Boston, Mass General Hospital, and the State House, among other things. I mean, it generally is very easy to get onto the system from Porter Square. Trains come by just about every 10 minutes. So people may, you know, just not consider that when they should be considering that as an option. And I know sometimes you do have to wait a long time, but it's pretty easy to carry a book. And use your time productively. So that's my cheering the MBTA.
Thank you, Claire. And of course, the business about getting the right ticket to be able to use does require some imagination. So, you know, perhaps we can use our local newspapers and our local communication systems to help people learn how to do that, so that they don't find themselves you know, confronted by the challenges of knowing how, in fact, to use the MTA system.
Yes, and for seniors, you can get a pass, so it's half price.
That's
So that
exactly
may be
right.
important to a lot of people too.
And that's one of the reasons we need, again, this is communication, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
always in the end about communication, isn't it? So, let's think about putting some piece in our local newspapers to try to help people understand how to do that, Claire. Let's take that on as a challenge, okay? Dory, I think you were next.
First of all, I can't help but comment about local community newspapers.
Oh, I
if we
know.
talk about a bird that's left the nest, I think. But following up on Hugh's really good comment about high school kids, it is now the norm that you really have to have a car. You're just not in the swim if you don't. But in Lexington, there's a wonderful bus service after school, which really crisscrosses the entire town. So if you want to go to the library or you want to go someplace to gather your friends for coffee or whatever high school kids do now, it is much more accessible. And in talking with parents of kids there, it is becoming more socially okay. And I think we talk about changing norms. This is a norm which would have a lifelong effect afterwards if people get used to doing this, as opposed to getting your own car when you turn 16 and then you have a problem at home because where do you park 5 cars in a driveway? But I do think that this whole idea of looking at youth and seeing how we can change ideas that way is probably better than trying to change some of us at this point in our lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dory. That gets back to Hugh's notion about paradigm shifts. Our Phil's notion about paradigm shifts. Ellie, I'm sorry, you were actually next, and I didn't mean to skip you. So you're muted though, so we can't quite hear you. Ellie, we can't hear you.
There, that's better. I think the high school has encouraged driving back and forth to school and not taking the bus. There was a big push to provide parking places for seniors when it was built. Yes, indeed. And I don't think that sent the proper message. It is your right to drive. It is your right to have a car and park it on the school property. It's unfortunate, and it's going to take a while. Young people, they saw older classmates doing it. So they think it is their right. The other thing is regarding the T, I am concerned about the safety record of the T, especially recently. Oh yes, the escalator accident, the horrible incident where the man fell through the stairs. It's true, he didn't belong on them, but they were left. There was a sign that was there for 20 months and those stairs went unfixed. The business about the escalator in Back Bay Station, those are horrible incidents. And, it doesn't seem that it is being addressed in coherent fashion. I do take the T. I like taking the commuter rail into Boston and going about any business I have there. Usually it's a medical appointment. But, when I see those incidents, you don't know when they're going to crop up. We cannot see the workings of the escalators. The ceiling tiles that were falling from our wife. The last time we went there, I looked up at the ceiling and I shuddered. And then you have the Mbta board. A member actually asked where our wife station was. Does Concord have any input? Do they, to be on the board? I mean, it seems you should visit every station to be qualified.
Those are good points. Thank you, Ellie, very much. Alewife is a pretty big station. That's astonishing.
No, it's hideous. And then to top it off, there is a pedestrian bridge over Route 2 for people to get to Alewife Station that is rusting out. Seriously.
These are things that, it always, so often, Nick, doesn't it? It comes down to money, but maybe it comes down to imagination.
It comes down to money, true, but the state has gotten infrastructure money. And the T would be a perfect place to spend it. And you have to raise taxes. You have to do what it takes to
To do this.
assure the safety of commuters.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I hope we will write our local representatives and encourage them to pay attention to this. David, you have another question or another comment? Thank you.
To be sure that the central issue I pointed at, Nick alerted us to initially, is unmistakable. Of course, the point about people preferring to have cars rather than fewer of them was not aimed at the high school per se, although there we see the problem writ large, but to illustrate with yet another preference issue, the question of, do we want to live in more concentrated settings geographically so there's less need for transportation, or is there an interest for, as I put it in the chat, elbow room? And you can be quite sure there are plenty of people who think their elbow room trumps any other consideration. The point, of course, is not to suggest one or the other, but simply to underline what I think Nick pointed us to originally. The real problems here are not technological. They are not do this or do that. The real problems are social and political. The real problems are getting consensus on what solutions we would be interested in, which is the only way, consensus is the only way we'll then get actual efforts of a systemic character headed in that direction.
Thank you, David. It's systems has become a key word in our discussion this morning.
Because of Nick.
Yeah, we have about 7 minutes left, and I do see here that Phil has put in the chat https://www.strongtowns.org/journal. Et cetera. I don't have to read all that, but if you have a chance to copy that and then use it, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. I just went to the topic itself, to the page. Looks like a good source for all of us to be able to use. Just a minute, I've now lost my connection, but I'll get it right back. It looks like it's a good source for us to turn to. Phil, I think you're still on the call. Could you tell us a little bit about that source? Is Phil still on?
Yeah, so the fellow who wrote the book is a professional engineer and traffic engineer. And his writing echoes a number of the comments made today about rethinking how we design our streets and design our places. He's, over the course of his career, of course, as a young engineer, followed the rules, did what he was told, but noticed over the course of time that traffic increased, congestion increased, and people's satisfaction with the places that they lived decreased. And he's an advocate for re-examining the premises. And he has very concrete examples about how to do that along the lines of what Nick was observing in the city. So, within the curbstones, you can change a lot of things relatively inexpensively, quickly, and accomplish a lot. But what it requires people to do is to come together and develop a political consensus that is appropriate. I think for our purposes, and I'll throw this idea out, I'm a big advocate for piloting and modeling ideas. So as long as they're safe, right? You don't want to put people into danger, but all over the metropolitan area, there are new ways of thinking about streetscapes between existing curbstones. So no one's actually moved any granite, but they have put little parks, they have put restaurants, they have put bike lanes. They have put all kinds of facilities that are very imaginative. And I would encourage everyone, if they have the opportunity, to drive into the city, or, you know, into Arlington, into Cambridge, into Acton. We were talking about getting people back and forth to the train station. So Acton has a great model on Central Street with a bike lane that brings you from West Acton down to South Acton to the train station with a bike lane. And then when you get to the train station, there are like little closets where people can put their stuff and store their bikes safely and out of the weather. So these concepts are not just theories, they're actually easily observable if you take a few minutes to drive around.
Thank you so much. This has proven to be such a rich conversation. When we summarize all this and put it on Monday Member News, and I hope everybody on this call is a member of the League, because then you'll have access to our weekly newsletter. So please renew, sign up, engage. We will put that reference to the engineering page that you mentioned for us, Phil. So thank you very much. I want to end by thanking Nick. Nick, this has been fantastic. I mean, you've got us started on what is obviously a complicated but engaging conversation, one that I think, thanks to the work of Terry Ackerman and the Select Board, will now be a central focus of the town. And I think it can do nothing but produce healthy outcomes as long as we keep our minds open, our imagination clear, and our compassion, acting actively for both the world we live in and for each other. I want to thank Carlin Reed for handling the chat box with such aplomb. In the background, you can't see her. There's Julie Rowing, who's been managing the recording and managing the screenshots. Julie, wherever you are, thank you very much. And to Linda Ziffrin, who's booted us up and got us going. And to all the people in the League who serve on the Town Government Committee and help us to think about making our town a creative and healthy place for everyone. Thank you very much. If we didn't get to a chat or a comment you have, please send it to me at dpdproctor@gmail.com. And I would be more than happy to make sure those questions get to Nick or get to the Transportation Committee or send them directly to the Select Board. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.